and I'm the diversity and inclusion specialist for the Office of the Dean. And I'll pass it on to Dr. Lagaki.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Danielle Lagaki. I am an associate professor and the department chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning at Oakland University. I'm one of the founding members of the Initiative for Eradicating Racism with Dr. Scott and Dr. Martin, and we're really excited to be here and partner with our wonderful folks in Pontiac again.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Martin. I'm also one of the founding task force members with the Initiative for Eradicating Racism. I teach full-time at Oakland U. I am the coordinator for the Masters of Education and Educational Leadership, and I also teach a course in the PhD EDD program, Social Justice and Organizational Leadership, and I work with Dr. Klein in the Central Office program also. And I'm very, very happy to be here this evening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Greg Bartley. I am the newest member of the Initiative to Eradicate Racism. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Oakland, and I'm also the chair of the School of Education and Human Services Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's nice to be here with y'all. I'm looking forward to learning with you tonight.
Thank you. PCIP is happy to partner with the Initiative for Eradicating Racism. In 2022, PCIP hosted a workshop, a 3-day workshop entitled Undoing Racism. And over that 3-day period, we had deep conversation, uncomfortable conversations to some extent with our community leaders as it relates to racism within our systems. So we looked at our systems as it relates to the judicial system, our healthcare systems, our educational systems, and just explored the challenges that affect our underrepresented communities. So a couple of months ago, or late last year, there was a challenge or a grant available by Oakland University, a community impact grant. And Dr. Martin was my professor. And so I shared with him the work that Pontiac Collective Impact Partnership was doing in the Pontiac community. And we thought that we would want to apply for that grant, but how could we work together to not just continue the conversation about undoing racism, but move further and talk about eradicating racism. So today, back in March, we did host our first Eradicating Racism event, where we brought in guest speaker, Monica Emery, to share with us. And so tonight we wanted to continue that conversation, and we decided to take a journey through Pontiac's history and share some of the disparities that have taken place over the decades here in Pontiac and how it brings us to where we are today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we'll kick it off with the I'll start with a video, then I'll go through a presentation about the community journey map of Pontiac, and then we'll share and turn it back over to the IER team and have some discussion. So give me one moment. Can you hear? I knew that was gonna happen.
No.
All right, 1 second. Let me stop sharing. Wait, let me figure out how to share sound. All right, let's see. Thumbs up if you can hear it.
The anti-busing forces promised to resist, and resist they did. The first gesture, a symbolic one. As Pontiac embarked on its first day of court-ordered school desegregation, a handful of women chained themselves to a fence surrounding the depot, where 10 buses were destroyed by firebombing 8 days ago.
Don't touch me! Don't touch!
Police finally removed the pickets, arresting 9 women for disorderly conduct. Way to go, Dow. We're proud of you, girl. Good try. The buses then rolled, their assigned mission to transport nearly 9,000 of Pontiac's youngsters in an effort to achieve racial balance in the city's elementary and junior high schools. At one stop, the previously all-white LeBaron School, bus drivers were met by pickets. Under the court order, LeBaron is to send its 5th and 6th grades to the all-black Wilson School. Wilson, in turn, is to send its 1st through 4th grades to LeBaron. In all, 300 children are involved.
He's going to school, and he's going to behave, and he's going to get along with everybody. You've got to learn to get along with everybody. You can't just. You've got to work with all kinds of people. You might as well start right now working with all kinds of people. I don't like to have to take a bus. We live right across the street. But he's going to take a bus if that's where he has to go to school.
But Mrs. Gaffney appeared to be an exception among white parents, a large number of whom supported a boycott. At LeBaron, attendance was off by nearly 50%. But black parents seemed equally reluctant to send their children to school. Attendance at the Wilson School, less than half the expected 450 students. At the offices of the Board of Education, the anti-busing parents sang and marched, and their leader, Mrs. Irene McCabe, delivered a guinea pig in a makeshift bus to Pontiac's school superintendent, Dana Whitmer. Later, some school violence was reported. A bomb threat forced evacuation of one school. Near another, a fight between blacks and whites resulted in the hospitalization of several students.
Can you all see my screen? Thank you. All right. All right, so based on that video, as you can see, in Pontiac, white flight came after the busing desegregation. Well, we know in Detroit, white flight came after the riots. So today what we're going to do is take a look at decades of racial disparities from Pontiac then and now. The racial tension in Pontiac was high in the early 70s. Two attorneys was at the center of Pontiac's racial tension. Attorney L. Brooks Patterson was the attorney that represented the anti-busing advocates, the whites, and attorney Albert Hatchett defended the blacks. This took place in the late 60s and the early 70s. Pontiac was the center of school desegregation movement, and they were using busing to do this. 1972, August 30th in 1971, the KKK wanted to prevent segregation of schools, so they bombed 10 buses in the city of Pontiac. Here in 1972, you see there's a photo of Michigan anti-busing activists rallying in the nation's capital. This was led by Miss Irene McCabe, a white woman from Pontiac, and also an anti-busing advocate who led this group in Washington, D.C. Attorney Patterson was the attorney for this group. Attorney Albert Hatchett won the lawsuit that against attorney Patterson. Judge Damon Keith ruled Pontiac to integrate its school systems at all levels, student body, faculties, as well as administration. Judge Damon Keith ruled that the school district created policies to perpetuate racial discrimination and segregation. In the 1980s, this was the decade of criminal justice system. This was the height of the crack epidemic through the 80s and early 90s, and this was when a major spike in drug addictions and incarceration existed. If we can recall, the crack epidemic was a surge of crack cocaine, the use in major cities across the United States. the entirety of the 80s as well as the early 90s. This resulted in a number of social consequences, such as increasing crime and violence in American inner cities, such as Pontiac, a resulting of backlash in the form of tough on crime policies, and a massive spike in the incarceration rates. In the 90s, particularly in 1994, this is when the crime bill was added. The three-strike law. 3 strikes landed a person in prison with a life sentence. Distinction between cocaine, which was known as white people or rich people's drug, and crack cocaine, which was known as Black or poor people's drug. During this time in the 90s, the General Motors automotive plant began closing its doors. This happened between 1994 and 2010. General Motors was the largest employer and tax base here in the city of Pontiac. And as a result of its closures, many jobs left and the income taxes went away. In the 1990s, we also saw an influx of charter schools, which began to open. Continuing in the 1990s, Pontiac was General Motors' main production for truck and buses. Pontiac's assembly plant was part of a larger campus. It eventually encompassed 400 acres and more than 60 buildings. This is the bus that Rosa Parks rode on was actually built right here at the Pontiac plant. This plant was located just west of Interstate 75. The Pontiac Assembly Plant was part of a much larger Pontiac Central Manufacturing and Assembly Plant. Right now, the assembly plant site included the 6 buildings totaling 3.8 million square feet, which is now being demolished and a railroad spur. In the 2000s, the influx of charter schools continued to grow. The public school enrollment began to decrease, and a continuous decline of the automotive industry here within the city of Pontiac. In 2010, as a result of the influx of charter schools, the Pontiac School District closed 10 schools. In 2011, the state lifted the cap on charter schools, allowing more charter schools to be developed. In 2013, the city of Pontiac was forced into emergency management. All officials, the mayors, city councils, and other elected offices were relieved of their power and their authority. 2017, there was a rally to keep the 2 high schools open. In 2018, the school went into a consent agreement where they reported to the ISD and to the state. In 2020 and beyond, the Pontiac School District has experienced a financial surplus. The Pontiac School District is now debt-free. The Pontiac School District has competitive salaries for their teachers, their staff, and now the Pontiac is under new leadership under Mayor Tim Grimo, where they're focusing on bigger projects such as road construction, citywide cleanup initiatives, and community centers. The 2 giants that we spoke of, Attorney L. Brooks Patterson and Attorney Albert Hatchett, lived to see all of this. Patterson passed away in 2019 as the county executive for Oakland County. Attorney Albert Hatchett passed away in 2021 as a Pontiac lawyer and civil rights activist. So here's what we know about the city of Pontiac. Pontiac is located in Oakland County, one of the nation's wealthiest, highest educated county. Half of Pontiac's residents fall under the asset, limited income, constrained, and employed threshold, which is known as ALICE. So this community journey map of racial desegregation in Pontiac was compiled during our Undoing Racism workshop back in 2022. And it allowed us to view racism in our economic, housing, education, healthcare, political, as well as the judicial systems, shedding light on how it impacts our community and the residents here in the city of Pontiac. So throughout the rest of this presentation and discussion tonight, we need to have a conversation to talk about how do we eradicate these systems, and that conversation starts with us.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Anisha. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hand it over to Dr. Scott so she can kick off the next phase of our discussion.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you, Anisha, for that awesome overview. I appreciate that. So before we begin into our discussion questions, we kind of want to go over a little bit of what the Initiative for Eradication is and what they stand for. So we'll start out with that. At the beginning of the presentation, we already introduced ourselves. So we want to start off talking about what is the Initiative for Eradicating Racism. It is an interdisciplinary task force created after the 2020 murder of George Floyd and supported by our collective energies dedicated to educating and transforming our colleagues, students, community partners, and members in dismantling racism in the U.S. and globally. You know, our main work is done at Oakland University. So again, there's 4 of us involved in this work right now. We're a small group, but we come to this work with, you know, a lot of experience, an understanding of racism, and a dedicated mindset to really work on this effort continuously. The purpose of our group is to identify and highlight racist practices in PK and 20 education, amplify anti-racist dialogue through our teaching, scholarship, and service. Examples include course assignments, panels, symposiums, articles, book chapters, and programming. And we want to recruit and retain additional students and staff members, as well as administrators of color at Oakland University. Basically, we want to increase our numbers. The need for the Initiative for Eradication is very clear. For first, we want to say that, you know, we're not an extension of the DEI group. I think many times people, when they hear the word eradicating racism or anti-racism, they think DEI. And we're talking 2 separate groups. So our need is we want to address the educational disparities that are predicated by race. You know, the slaughter of Black citizens that we've seen too many times in the newspaper and throughout the media. We want to address wealth disparities predicated by race. We want to look at the rising school racial incidents and the lingering rising incidents globally in society that are related to race and social injustices. Our goal is to, because we started in 2020, as previously stated, so we're a very young group, but our goal is to become a grant-funded center for eradicating racism at Oakland University. So we want to move from an initiative to a center, you know, to where we can, you know, actually do more work through the center. We want to sponsor annual anti-racism focused symposiums at the intergenerational level. We want to do work for students as well as adults and younger students. We want to develop partnerships with the Center for Strategic Learning in Pontiac, Michigan, as well as other organizations globally that support anti-racism work. We also want to develop a body of anti-racism scholarship that's focused on anti-racist teaching and programming in higher education, which there is a lack of at this time. And we want to expand our advisory council so we can hear from other organizations and partner and work alongside other organizations who are doing this work. To date, we've been a small group, but I think a very active group in trying to get our work out there. So we've published some articles and some book chapters that are coming up in September that are coming out on the work we've been doing. We've presented at professional conferences on the topic of anti-racism. We facilitated anti-racism training sessions, as well as webinars that focus on implicit and explicit bias in professional settings. We've also talked about it in our courses, anti-racism. And we have received a grant to work with the OU Pontiac Initiative Group, which is a part of what we're doing today. So we're very excited to work with them and continue our work. On March 14th, we had our first event to where we were having an in-person event downtown Pontiac to open up the dialogue session around undoing racism and the workshop that was previously done in phase 1 by the Pontiac Initiative. The purpose of that event was to incorporate community dialogue on eradicating racism. So this evening, we're kind of moving from phase 1, which was done by Pontiac, phase 2, which we did in March as a team, as a group. And now this evening, we're working on phase 3, which is our goal is to continue this community conversation by focusing on how to undo racism in ways that lead to eventual eradication of racism. So we have posed some questions, and we want to open up the dialogue for our guests and everyone on board tonight to kind of answer these questions. So, Anisha, how many people do we have? Do we want to break out into groups, Danielle, or what is the suggestion here?
We have 25 participants on the call.
Okay.
I know we're a little bit larger group than we were in person, but I think we might have some really vibrant dialogue if we stay together. And if we find, folks aren't getting a chance to talk, then we can always split out into maybe 3 smaller groups.
Okay, sounds fine. All right, so we'll open it up with question 1. So our strategy is to, move to the eradication of racism. For us, that means ending racism. And undoing, to me, means that it can be undone. So, we can slow something down and it seems okay for right now, but is that really what we want to do? So I'd like to hear some comments on eradicating versus undoing. And you can unmute yourself.
Or to build on that slightly, if anybody has ideas about what eradicating racism actually looks like. So if you were to try to explain to somebody what that means to you, what would eradicating racism actually look or feel like?
I think for me, sorry, this is Karen. The eradicating is an action, where like undoing seems like it could just be a process that doesn't have a necessary action. It's just a dismantling, perhaps. But in speaking of eradicating it, to me, that feels more like action. And then that would imply actionable steps.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else?
I'll be transparent here. I struggle with my personal inclination toward incrementalism, and that's just my moderate default, but that racism is so deplorable and reprehensible that I feel like it's something that should be eradicated yesterday, but I struggle with then the back and forth with that is not how life works. People need time to process and change, but it's just a struggle because it's reprehensible.
Mhm. Very true. I see racism too because there's so many different types of racism. You need to really look at specifically what are you talking about? You're talking about individual racism, you know, racial, structural racism, systematic racism. So because there's so many types, uh, which they all need to be eradicated, but it's kind of like, where do we start? You know? So I think that's a good point to think about. Moving on to our next question, what is the individual harm of racism that people have seen? I just need to see some examples. So could we share some of those examples?
This is Julie. I think one kind of individual harm is simply feeling less than. And I know that just seems very general and generic, but with students, a lot of times I don't know how to explain it. I see them taking stock of how others value them or don't value them. So I think at an individual level, it can be very harmful emotionally. Just straight out, I feel bad now for a given student who might be faced with racism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Other
Julie,
example.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to build on what Julie was saying. It's difficult because you feel invisible sometimes, and that feeling is not affirming at all. And it takes a lot of inner fortitude to combat that.
And I don't want to take up all the time, but I guess the other one for me individually is the challenge of pushing back when I hear things that I feel are not appropriate. And individually, I feel so there's, guilt, there's fear, there's guilt when I don't push back, fear of pushing back on some people, if somebody made a comment or did something. So individually, I feel not too safe in pushing back.
Thank you, Julie. I saw Jennifer's hand first and then Juanita's.
Yeah, hi. So, and I want to preface this by saying, I am a white woman. I'm a professor at Oakland University. And so, the things that I'll share are not my own experience, but things that I see happening to our students. And there's always that kind of implicit bias that is going to impact their success in the classroom, which then, as you think about how this plays out across time and space, it might be impacting their GPAs or their likelihood of getting accepted to graduate school or getting letters of support from faculty, getting scholarships if people perceive them not to be as polished as other candidates that, might have different language or kind of different portrayals in these systems. And so, these things might seem like relatively minor in everyday life, like, oh, it's just a little slight, why are you taking it so seriously? But then I see how this plays out over time and impacts, their career progression and their economic mobility and all of that. And so that's why I take these things so seriously to heart, because I can see these students who are really navigating these complex systems. Thank you.
This is Juanita. It's interesting. I mean, I knew this was coming, but it's interesting that we're actually talking about the harm of racism right now, because my granddaughter is experiencing some issues at her school. She is pretty much the only Black student in all of her classes. She is in middle school right now. And the situation she's dealing with, she's been in this particular school district now for a couple of years. Prior to that, she went to a school where it was very diverse. So, and she didn't have these kinds of issues. Now, where she is, she's experiencing a lot more, and she doesn't understand. And, so she thinks, why am I being picked on? What did I do? Those kinds of things. So that's what she has to deal with on her end. But also there is harm to the racist as well, because they're operating out of a sense of ignorance. And right now I'm talking about children, but they grow into adults who are still ignorant to these kinds of things. And often I think a lot of the harm is, and I say ignorance purposely because they can grow into adults who really still don't see that they're racist. And so that is a huge issue, especially when we think, especially we're talking about kids or students, they eventually grow into adults who will be in certain areas of employment or authority, and they carry that same ignorance with them.
Juanita, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I'm really sorry your granddaughter's going through that. Can I ask, you said she's in middle school?
Yes.
So have you had conversations with her where you're helping her name what's happening, or have you not gotten there yet?
Okay, so all right. She's not in Pontiac. It's in another city in the state, not far. But one of the issues, and my daughter is trying to deal with it, but her problem is that my daughter actually works for the district. And so she has to try to navigate, the parent and the administrator at the same time in dealing with this issue. I mean, she's perfectly capable of dealing with it herself. As a matter of fact, there was an incident just yesterday, and my daughter has decided that she wrote a letter to the principal, who for some odd reason was not aware of the previous incidents. And the other thing is that she's just decided to take her out of that particular school and put her into a school that has more diversity. So it's being handled, but I'll tell you this is what happened. And this is why she's confused. And honestly, I think on some level, the kid that said it probably didn't even realize what he was saying or what it meant. He said to her at lunchtime, "I bet I know what your favorite drink is." And she looked at him and he said, "Grape Kool-Aid." Now, see, me as a Black woman, I know what that means. My granddaughter had no clue what he was talking about. And then the kids are laughing and they think it's funny, and but she had no clue. And some of you may not know what that means, but it's like chicken and watermelon, but, and that's the thing. So and there are any number of examples where the racist doesn't realize just what they're saying or doing is actually racist. And so when you talk about eradicating and undoing, I'm not sure how you do that.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing. And I think when you circled back to the first question, that's what I was going to say. You know, we see in our undergraduate students and our pre-service teachers, you know, so many have been raised with this idea of like, we live in a post-racial society, right? Like we had a Black president, everything's fine. And so, you know, we can't, and they get so angry sometimes when they sit in our classes and we have to help them see, you know, what Dr. Scott was talking about implicit biases and about, you know, institutional racism and structural racism. But if we don't do that work, we don't have any hope of eradicating it. And then we end up in exactly what you're describing. You have an ignorant group of children who go up to be an ignorant group of adults, and then we just stay stuck in the cycle.
Absolutely.
Nicole, I see your hand up.
Hello, I'm trying to get off mute and start my video so that you can see me. I don't know if you can.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to say my mother, who is sitting with me right now, Libertha Thomas Johnson, was one of those teachers that you showed in the early on in the video who helped to desegregate the schools. She came here to Pontiac from Louisiana in 1964 and was a teacher and retired from Pontiac schools. And I also have many other family members who are teachers and who experienced some of what you showed on the video. So it was a lot of history that had been discussed in my household throughout my life. So that was a really interesting kind of throwback. So I just wanted to put that. But yeah, in terms of racism, I believe what it does is it just breaks the connection. It just separates. And that feeling of separation, whether it's something, a negative feeling that happens to our young people in the schools, whether it happens in our communities where right now, one of the organizations that I'm in is holding a golf outing. It's a Pontiac-centered organization. Whether I feel that my good friends, some of them who are white men who golf all the time, can be invited to this event, or whether I would feel comfortable inviting them, or whether they would feel comfortable being invited. These types of separations, I think, still might not be what we call racism, but they are remnants of racism. And they're the kinds of things that just separate us as a community where we can't come together. It's so nice that we're coming together in this forum where we do have a diverse group of people, very unique situation. So I just feel like it truly separates. I have one friend, I grew up like the Miss Scott, I believe, her daughter, where I was many times the only Black student in the classroom. And I have great friends that I have even till now, to today, who were a part of that process for me. And I experienced some of what she's saying. So it was difficult, but at the same time, one of my good friends who now lives in the, not UP, but Upper Michigan, Traverse area, Kalkaska area. And I asked her, I said, well, are you concerned that your kids won't have the experience we had, where we had a good friendship and some diversity? And this friend grew up going to church with me going to her, family gatherings, all of those things. And I asked her, does it disappoint you that your children will not have that type of diverse experience that we had together growing up and still remaining friends? And she said, I never thought about that. And that was the difference between the two of us for me, was that I'm always thinking about what type of relationships my niece and nephew are building, what they're experiencing in this world, how they navigate through the world. And for her, it wasn't something to even consider, even though we had this relationship. So I think that it not only separates us in our communities, it separates our open discussion. And racism sometimes even blocks, I think, the growth that we might have as individuals and for our children. And so it can be a very serious issue, especially with what we're doing today, talking about community building and building in our schools and in our community and the things we want to do for the future. If racism is still there, we are not able to, move forward as a Pontiac community that we need to be. So thank you so much. And I would like to introduce my mother, Libertha Thomas, who's here, 87 years old, retired teacher. Who they can't see you, Ma. You gotta stand up.
Yeah,
Okay.
she taught my children. She taught my children at Crowfoot.
Who started off at Owen, and one of the stories she tells is she had a supportive principal that year, a white man who was a principal and who helped her throughout that year. So we always need allies, and that is an important part. And one of the things she said, she walked into the halls every morning, and back then teachers used to stand outside of their door when the children were coming in to greet them. And so she would walk down the hall, and the teachers she would say good morning, and no one would speak to her. No one would say hello. And it took almost the whole year before finally one of the teachers said, good morning, or greeted her in a proper way. So we have people in our community who still know those stories and who can be of great resource to us in helping us with these types of discussions. Thanks so much for giving me this time.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you so much. I think that you hit on some, critical points. Both of our last speakers there, talked about how, people are doing these things, but they're so unaware that they're doing that. And I think that is a great starting point because they've already done it. Now you can bring it to their attention, what they have done and how it is harmful. So, I think that is excellent that was brought forward. So now we want to take some questions, answers to questions about the societal harm we talked about in schools, but, how does, racism harm society? Can we get some
We have a hand
answer
up.
question? Go ahead.
Dr. Phillips.
Yes, good evening. I just, well, I won't talk about that, but I'm sitting here trying to figure out. I think that the second and the third question go hand in hand. I think the individual harm of racism is that people make judgments about people of color without even trying to get to know them. And I think that for some of them that they have deep-seated feelings about people of color and other minorities for that matter. The societal harm of racism is that if you don't have, as a minority, a strong constitution, you are not going to interact and share your vast level of knowledge that you have to share. I started out my career in the Pontiac School District and ended my career in the Rochester School District. So I have had experience in what was at that time when I was there predominantly African-American clientele to go to a place where, I was in a definite minority. And but for people, white people, who surrounded me and helped me navigate through that sometimes very racist interactions, I don't know if I would be here today because I probably would have hurt somebody and been sent off to the prison because it was just that deep. However, as you can see, I persevered. I did more than persevere. We used to hit it head on. Like every central office person had to read Ruby Bridges. Not only read it, but talk about how we could get it out into the buildings. And so at one point, every administrator in Rochester had to not only read Ruby Bridges, but talk about what they could do at every level of the organization to deal with racism. And then, of course, when I left, I think all of that left with it. It didn't, yeah. I don't even want to talk about Rochester now, but it didn't survive the way I had hoped it would survive. And it's very difficult because people are very uncomfortable talking about it. They don't want to be perceived as a racist, even if they are. And I applaud, and I just kind of stumbled into this meeting. I know God works in mysterious ways, but I applaud that we're even talking about it. I really do. But I don't know if you can ever get rid of it altogether, but you can certainly, if you have the right people in place, continually have conversations about it and put some measurable kinds of things in place with those people who are leading the charge. And I'm sorry I took up all that time, but I said was what was on my heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Scott, if I could just respond, Dr. Phillips, you and I have met years ago. We have a
Yes, we
mutual
have.
friend, Larry
Yes, we
Thomas.
have.
And
Yes.
I want you to know that your influence and your leadership continues. The legacy may not be as predominant in the Rochester schools as we would like for it to be, but it continues on in the commitment that some of our allies have developed for social justice and for equity. And a lot of it can point back to you and your influence and your leadership. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I remember my interactions with you, and I probably owe most of what I was able to do to you. Thank you.
Other responses for the societal question? Okay, so we'll move on. So how is Pontiac specifically impacted by generational racism? More specifically today, we've kind of seen the past examples in the video.
May I just offer my perspective?
Sure, sure.
When I was in Pontiac, we had 2 high schools, 4 middle schools, and I don't know, 12 to 14 elementaries. In Pontiac, you now have 1 middle school, 1 high school, and 4 elementaries. I think that there has been a mass exodus out of Pontiac, and Pontiac now is a shell of what it used to be when I was there. So to talk about generational racism, I think it goes back to what I just tried to share. It starts with those people who are in a position to make a difference, and perhaps they're choosing not to. And I think that on this issue, it really has to come, I think, more wholeheartedly from the white side of the issue to be working hand in hand with minorities to change it. And I don't know if there are enough people left in Pontiac to be able to do that in any kind of impactful way. And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just trying to be realistic about where we find ourselves in Pontiac. And I applaud Anisha Hanna and her group and the board and all the people who are trying to make the difference. But there are so few white people left in Pontiac. And I think that Dr. Hanna talked about that earlier. There's like a mass exodus. And if our young people leave the district, they mess up in these other districts, then they send them back to Pontiac, but with no money. Let's be clear about that. The money does not come back with them. So I I don't know. I just think that we have to hold hands and try to do what we can. And I think that sometimes you just have to have painful conversations. And people, if they are racist, have to admit they're racist and move on from that. But you cannot pretend that you're not a racist when we know good and well that you are. And I think minorities, for whatever reason, are more open to these kind of conversations, to be honest and open about them, like my sister Juanita just did with her situation with her grandchild. You know, it's a tall task, and I'm not suggesting it can't be attempted, it can't be done. But the people on this call, I think, or on this Zoom, have to be willing to have some very difficult conversations with people at every level of the organization and get their buy-in. And I'm not going to talk anymore. I promise.
No, we're so grateful for your voice. Thank you. Monique, I saw your hand.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Martin. This is the stuff that I love. Pontiac born and raised. So I love my city. My daddy used to say Pontiac is the center of the universe. I was just at the high school on Friday, and I'm trying to put this nicely. It's different. It's a lot different from when I was there. I graduated from Pontiac Central, but I did do a year and a half at Pontiac Northern. But I remember it being a bit more diverse than what I saw on Friday. So that was kind of the first thing that raised my antenna about what's going on, at least in the school system. Mrs. Phillips, my soror, Mrs. Phillips, said about the number of high schools and middle schools that were in the city when I was growing up. And we're down to one high school. It breaks my heart. But in my heartbreaking, I know that something has to be done. I remember a different city. I remember a vibrant city. I remember, people being proud of their neighborhoods. My granddaddy used to cut the grass every Saturday, wash his car every Saturday. We had block parties. I mean, it was just a different time. And I just have to believe, and maybe I'm just, very, very optimistic. Maybe, I just love the idea of going back to a different time. But I just believe in my heart that the city that I grew up in, the community that I grew up in, it's still there. We just have to come back in some kind of way. And I want to be part of its rebirth. So I thank you for
I was remiss. I just want to thank you for reminding me, my soror, of what I should have said. My son, Solon Phillips, graduated from Pontiac Northern. He is now the corporation counsel at Oakland County. And he got his fundamentals from people like Joanne Battle, Catherine Sykes at Pontiac, and there were many more at Pontiac Northern High School. I think that's important for you to know. So I remember, as my soror remembers, when things were very, very different in Pontiac in general. But that's where he really got his, I want to say, his strength from that English department. They didn't play. And he went on to FAMU. He went to law school at University of Wisconsin Law, and he's had various and sundry important positions within his field, but he owes it all to the Pontiac School District. He went through from Harrington Elementary to Pontiac Northern, where he graduated. And it breaks my heart that perhaps, well, we're not there now, but I don't know that it is impossible, I think, for us to get back to where we were in the district. And I swear, I'm going to be quiet. I really am.
Karen.
Thank you, everyone, for that. Like Dr. Phillips, I'm seeing the link between like 3 and 4. So some of the work that I do, I'm in art education at OU, so I work with pre-service teachers that want to become art teachers. And 2 years ago, I changed one of our courses, so we would have, rather than having an observational field experience, we do service learning at, we started at Pontiac High School, so we've done 2 iterations of that now. And we're going to be adding the other school, which is the ITA school. And I think thinking of societal harm, and then I think about that as it relates to this generational harm. And when we work with the students, and they're mostly freshmen at Pontiac High School, and we ask them, what their experiences were like in art class in middle school, and there aren't any. And then we ask them, well, what about elementary school? And there aren't any. And that to me is a generational loss of creative expression, of being able to think differently and think in a way that allows you to possibly, imagine something different, imagine something that maybe comes from something else. So I think of that, and I also think about like our own ESSA Act that says that children and students are supposed to have educational opportunity inclusive of the arts. And that was specific language that was put into that bill. And that's where I see the generational issue, because it's impacting them over time. And I came to understand more about Pontiac High School through the art experience in Pontiac. So that the art experience is my partner in the OU Pontiac initiative. So I'm on the visual arts pillar. And so the work that we do at the art experience also tries to kind of combat those things that happen in a community when these, I want to say, lack of access and equity over years and years and years impacts generations.
Thank you, Karen. Before we go on to Juanita, Danielle, can I just share a couple of comments that were in the chat?
I think I captured them all, but yeah, please go ahead so the rest of the group shares. Yep.
Okay. From Shauna Boomgard, she mentioned that, sorry, I'm multitasking, but facing ourselves and noticing our own personal parts of it, we have to feel it and take action to heal it. Learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness. And I believe Shauna was responding to probably the first question or the second one. And then you responded. Did we respond to Dr. Wakabayashi? She indicated racism is a toxic stressor that could lead to mental and physical health disparities, impacts educational outcomes and social behaviors. Traumas get under our skin. Children cannot learn when under stress or trauma. That's why the OU piece does what they do. That's why OU piece does what they do. And that consists of Shauna as well as Coco. But thank you, Dr. Wakabayashi, for sharing that too. And I think that was it. And there were some other comments.
Juanita, did you want to go ahead?
Oh, yes, thank you. Like many and others, I didn't grow up in Pontiac, but I've been here almost 50 years. My 4 kids all graduated from Pontiac Central. And they have gone on to do great and wonderful things. They are really sought out in their field. And I think that's a part of it. I see the term generational racism, and I used to have a lot of discussions about generational poverty. And when I say generational poverty, I don't just mean money. I mean, there's a lack that is that I've noticed that has been passed down. So it's like the parents have convinced themselves that something is. And so they're convinced, and then they convince their children. And so they just continue to just go down that rabbit hole. One of the things that I know specifically is happening in Pontiac, and we were literally just having this conversation earlier today, is, my husband, like I said, we've been here for a long time. And we have been asked many times over the years, why do you still live in Pontiac? Why haven't you moved? Even when our kids were growing up, you should you should move so your kids can go to better schools. We had a lot of friends who moved out of the city so that their kids could go somewhere else. Now we have a lot of kids who actually live in Pontiac, but they don't go to school in Pontiac because there's a perception that they cannot get a good education in the city of Pontiac, that they have to go to Bloomfield or West Bloomfield or Rochester or whatever to be able to get that. And I think it was Monique or someone who was talking about what it was like when they were growing up and going to Pontiac schools. And my kids had that same experience. The schools were very diverse. My oldest daughter, as a matter of fact, was on the first robotics team that went on to win a national championship. And ironically, one of the things that they encountered when they traveled to compete, and especially when they went to Disney and they won, is that, they had such a diverse team that other people couldn't understand how, first of all, how did you manage to get such a diverse team and then be able to work together and get to that point of being a national champion? Because people just have that perception of what it must be like to live and go to school in Pontiac. And I think parents and other people have fed into that to the point where it's just accepted that just is. And I'm going to be like Minnie and try to stop talking.
Okay, do we have other responses to the question 4? Okay, moving on to question 5, given, what we've heard, what we've learned from the video, what we've learned a little bit about where Pontiac is now, what should Pontiac do to address the different aspects of racism that exist? What are some things you think that should be done or that we could help with as well? Okay, I see a hand. Go ahead.
Monique, and then Jasmine.
So I think this speaks to what Dr. Martin was saying is, I don't know where to start. Like, where do we start? Because there's so many layers to this. There's an economic layer to this. There's a fundamental, for lack of a better word, heart matter to this. Like, how do you speak to someone's heart when this is the way they've grown up. This is the way they've been taught. And how do you combat that? There's just so many layers to this. We can't start with all the layers, right? So we have to kind of peel it away layer by layer. And how do we get started? Which layer do we choose to address first? So it's just difficult. And I think that's where we get tripped up, is where to start and how to start. Thank you.
Monique, I'm so glad you said that. And I'm sorry, Jasmine, I'm just going to jump in 1 second. Because what you said speaks to a lot of where Dr. Scott and Dr. Martin and I really began this work, because we felt so strongly about, recruiting more faculty of color, recruiting more students of color. And then we realized, you know what? No, this isn't the environment that we want to bring folks into, because we're going to actively do harm. And so that kind of speaks to the layers you're describing, right? Like eventually we want to get to the core of, we need more people of color in this building and on this campus, but we need to make this environment much healthier before we work to bring them in. And so I agree. It's easy to get tripped up, right? We want to do all of these things. And if we can't do them, well, then, just forget it. But I think just the little steps, right? Which feel frustrating for those of us who understand all of the work that needs to be done. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge what you said, because that really speaks to the way we think on these things. Jasmine?
Hi, thank you. My name is Jasmine. I work in La Casa Amiga, it's Catholic Charities, but so we serve the Hispanic population in Pontiac. La Casa Amiga has been there, it's been around for more than 30 years. And I believe that making awareness of minorities is very important, and also celebrating the diversity, especially with young generations. I believe we have so many students in Pontiac High School, and we can start doing, I don't know, carnivals, party, don't want to say parties, but events that celebrate traditions, customs, and things that actually make everybody different, but appreciating those differences is important. I believe also that having representation of minority groups in, you say faculty, but also organizations, in politics, in, I don't know, so in every single group that make decisions is important as well. I believe also open these kind of discussions in several levels of society is very important, just to, in a way, to educate, but also to hear what is going on out there. I believe that, yeah, having that representation is important, so everybody knows that someone, they can identify with someone that is speaking for them, or at least representing them. I remember when I just came here some years ago, I was working as a Spanish teacher in Detroit, and I was working in a charter school. And I remember my English is not good now. It was it was worse back then. And I remember the students that I was teaching in 6th grade getting mad because I couldn't pronounce, I don't remember even what word. And at the end of the class, they were screaming to me, like, go back to your country. You don't even communicate. I was the adult there. I was the teacher there. And maybe 70% of those students were African American or Black. I remember that. And for me, it was traumatizing. I didn't want to go back. And the school was very nice addressing that. And they had this assembly with the students, and the parents were invited. And so it was a important thing for the school. So they address the situation, and they say, hey, we suffered this for years. What is going on now? How we are changing that to other minorities now? How is that we have been suffering that as parents were saying that we suffer that in the grandparents and so on. And now we are changing that and having the same reaction to the different in the room. So I believe that these things are going to happen, but it's important to address them and give them the importance that is that actually has. I remember that experience now as a learning experience, not just for me, but also for the students. And I could react different back then and teaching them and maybe sharing more about me and my country and wherever. But I didn't have the tools back then. I understand now more and better, and I can address those situations. But I believe it's important just to be aware of them. And, this discussion is very important, I believe, and I'm glad that I was here. And also sharing these kind of events to others, I believe is fundamental. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. So proud of your progress, and you're doing a great job speaking. So keep up the good work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I wanted to share. Was there any other hands before I jump in? No, that was it after Jasmine. I wanted to share one of the things that I think we need to do to address racism here in Pontiac is we need to call it out. We need to name it, bring attention to it when it happens. But I also wanted to highlight what I heard Dr. Price and Dr. Phillips talk about when they were remembering what the community used to look like. I too am a product of Pontiac School District. I attended Harrington with Dr. Phillips' son, graduated from Pontiac Northern High School as well. So the community that we lived in is quite different than what we're seeing today. But if you all recall in the video, it showed how Pontiac at one point was a booming industry for the automotives. We had plenty of jobs here. Our school district was probably one of the best in the county. But once they removed the jobs from our community, then that removed some of the community. That removed a lot of our workforce, or a lot of our workers from the community. Once they brought in or opened up the cap for charter schools to come into our community, then that made the enrollment for our public school district to decline, because now this gave people an opportunity to choose schools elsewhere. Before, there was a time where everybody wanted to come into the Pontiac School District to attend. They wanted to come into Pontiac area because of the jobs. But when those things started to diminish, so did the people. And so a lot of the challenges that we're seeing now within our community, it now rolls into our school. So you have a community where the workforce has totally changed. The community residents don't have the same value or work ethic or the educational attainment that a lot of our parents or relatives had before all of these changes started to take place. So it has literally been a systemic racial impact that has affected the Pontiac community. So when we talk about how do we change, what do, we have to remember that what we're seeing today in our schools is a reflection of what we see in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And so until we address our community, our neighborhoods, then we can see a change within our school districts. And that takes a lot of work, which is why I'm proud of the work that the Pontiac Collective Impact Partnership is doing, trying to bridge the gap between systems. We know for a long time there was strife between the city and the school district. There was strife between the county and the city. So now our role is to bridge the gap and to bring those systems together so that we can all work collectively to address the needs of our community as a whole. So it takes, as Dr. Phillips said, a lot of people having these type of conversations and being brave enough and bold enough to, one, acknowledge that racism does exist, and then having the confidence to even address it when they do see it appear in situations. So it takes us as leaders to make the changes or to try to address these systemic racial disparities that we see that ultimately impact our communities. Like we mentioned in the video also, Pontiac is a city with high poverty, but we sit inside of the richest county in the state. So I don't know that. I mean, that in itself says a lot. So it depends on the people. And of course, as people move out, then those individuals that are here doesn't necessarily have enough maybe wherewithal or just even the energy to want to do more or even know how to do more. So there's a lot of work, but I just wanted to share that the thing that I love is that one thing you can all see for those of you that are not from Pontiac is that Pontiac is a place of pride. There are those of us that have grown up here, and there was a time where we exuded the pride of, as Monique had mentioned, just cutting the grass or just taking pride in our properties, in our schools, and our children. And a lot of that pride has left, and it could be due to the racial harm that some may have felt and decided to move on and move outside of the Pontiac community to other places as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Excellent. Well, I think too, one of the things that Pontiac could do is, similar to my work in Minnesota, is to kind of highlight, what Pontiac is doing in spite of the racism. I mean, we have Dr. Price on here today. They got her doctorate degree from Pontiac. And Anisha is going to get hooded tomorrow with her doctorate degree. So, I mean, in spite of racism, people are still doing things. And that's what we've done in Minnesota, is to kind of highlight, what are the contributions that the current community is making to Pontiac. That needs to be up front. That's one way to combat the racism, because people don't know what you're doing. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you. Other comments?
Dr. Scott, since we have just a couple minutes to go, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide so everybody knows about our next event.
All right.
So we're hopeful that on May 20th, you can join us on campus for a town hall forum. We're going to make sure we get you all fed really well and that we have some time just to be in community together and have some more of these conversations. We're going to try to make sure we have young people present as well, because we feel really strongly about drawing in the youth community and making sure that we're hearing their voices and experiences and truly making sure we make this intergenerational, as we had said. So, I think it was amazing tonight to have folks who were 87 on the call with us. And I think it would be amazing to, have them sitting down next to a 17-year-old sharing a meal, right? So mark your calendars and we will share more details soon. Anisha, Dr. Scott, Dr. Martin, anything else you wanted to wrap up with?
Well, I just wanted to thank, our 25 people that joined us tonight. We do really appreciate your participation. We're working together as a unit. So, we need as many people as possible to be a part of this important work. So again, I would like to thank you personally for joining and look forward to having dinner with you on the 20th. We'll get a flyer out to you. So be watching for it and kind of mark that date in the evening on your calendar so you can join with us for dinner.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Good, robust, and rich thoughts in our conversation.
Agreed.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that being said, we want to thank you for your time tonight, and we will be reaching out to you through a flyer. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.